Welcome back to Beyond Your Balance Sheet from the Sedoric Group of Steward Partners Global Advisory. Beyond Your Balance Sheet explores the parts of life beyond one's financial affairs that contribute to happiness and overall well-being. The Sedoric Group is sponsoring this conversation series as part of its wider goal to help clients achieve fulfilling lives. As planners, they help people accumulate financial resources, but they also recognize the enormous importance of the client's mind, body, heart, and soul. And so, in this episode, we focus on the emotional side of the biggest financial investment most people will ever make, buying a home. While there's plenty of advice out there about the monetary part of this process, there's far less attention paid to the emotional aspects of it, even though greater awareness can ease stress and lead to more rational decisions that you won't regret later. We have three guests to explore this topic. They are John Rice. He's a real estate agent with Tate & Foss Sotheby's International Realty. John's a former president of the New Hampshire Association of Realtors and is the chief statistician for the Seacoast Board of Realtors. And John Rice, it's really great to talk to you. Thank you for being here.
Nice to be here.
Also with us is Renee Welchman. She's owner of the Welchman Real Estate Group, based in Rhode Island and affiliated with Keller Williams Coastal. Renee's been in real estate for 15 years. Before that, she had a career as a CPA and in finance and construction. And Renee, thank you also for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
And also joining us is Casey Snyder. He's Senior Vice President and partner of the Sedoric Group of Steward Partners. And a big welcome back, Casey. Thank you also.
Thanks, Laura. It's always good to see you.
So all of you, as you know, home buying is often ranked right up there as one of life's top stressors, along with the death of a loved one, birth of a child, changing jobs. John, you first, why is that? And what kind of emotions are typical?
Well, I got to say that first of all, emotions are kind of my thing because I have a master's degree in guidance counseling. I have seen all kinds of emotions in the business. On the one hand, I've seen the sort of a Jekyll and Hyde change in personalities in the middle of a sale, where you have someone. I've thought of one person in particular who was all sweetness and light and goody two shoes. As we got into things, the language became very salty, for lack of a better word, and the behavior became a little more violent, whatever.
Wow.
You know, I've seen that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you know, just to be fair, I've seen grace under pressure, and worked with some really nice people who amaze me that they can handle the stress sometimes better than I can. So I've seen a gamut there.
What's the stress about, John? Why is this so often ranked as one of life's big stressors?
Well, specifically, I was just thinking this morning, we have, as of last month, in the first of the month, we have 48 active listings in the Seacoast area and in the 13 sample Seacoast towns that I cover. And that's about a population of about 100,000 people or nearabouts. And there's about 3,000 real estate agents to sell those 48 homes. So if you begin with that, you have an understanding of the pressure that's there. And an active listing comes up that is in a hot spot in town. It's a feeding frenzy. And so, I mean, I guess that's sort of the beginning of where this all starts. There's lots of other dynamics, personal dynamics that go into it, but I just start from the way things are right now. It's a very stressful situation.
Wow. Yeah. And Renee, I want to ask you about the range of emotions that you see typically with your clients. And if you want to add into what John just said, you know, especially now with the tight market that John referenced.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, moving is the stressor, right? Changing everything about your life and where you want to go, how much money you've saved and spending. And really that is the stress. And then on top of that, add the stress into, especially first-time home buyers will fall in love with the first house they see and make an offer on. And if they're one of 40, and they don't have the expectation that they may have to make, a dozen offers before they get the right one, it becomes very stressful. And you have someone who enters the process as being very excited to getting very discouraged, and some of them just choose to stop. So, we have to manage those emotions, I think, as realtors, and set the expectations for them that this is the market right now, and you have to be competitive or patient, but it will happen.
Well, and you use the words falling in love. And I mean, we've all been through that with home buying. You see a house and you say, yes, 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 I can imagine myself living here. So talk a little bit more about that, Renee, this sort of process of almost like falling in love and then being rejected, 30 or 40 times. It's tough.
When I first got into real estate, people, I was so excited when I put something under contract. And I remember a wise seasoned broker saying, don't count your money until you're at the closing table, because anything can happen. Right. I sort of feel like that's what we should be telling buyers. Like, don't fall in love until we hand you the keys after it's recorded. Right. And I think buyers, especially these new buyers, need to loosen their expectations of what, they expect in their first home. I think that they have expectations that they should have everything instantly. And, maybe they need to just take a step back and realize that they can't get all 10 things on the checklist, right? And they can create the home that they want if they're willing to put the work into it. So,
you mentioned a checklist, and I'm definitely going to ask you that later on. But one more question for you, Renee, and then I want to bring Casey into this. What about, John mentioned today's housing market and just how tight it is. How do you see that sort of playing with your clients' emotions? Clearly, home buying is always stressful, but right now it seems especially laden with emotions.
Yeah, I try to lay expectations down and have a team of people working with our clients that also have the same ability to lay expectations. So we try to absorb a lot of things that don't need to go to the client that will create high emotions. And we try to keep the conversation very sort of matter of fact. And I think if you have this kind of conversation coming into your relationship, then you're not on a roller coaster of emotions. And that's the way it is. Everybody is feeling the same way. And I think if everybody realizes that, then everybody can just take a step back and calm down a little bit.
Well, Casey, let's bring you in. I mean, you provide overall financial advice. So obviously buying a home is a big part of the financial picture for most people. But what emotions do you see clients, Casey, bringing to the table when it comes around home buying or home selling?
I think John and Renee both touched on it already in terms of people falling in love. But from where we sit, we tend to see this sort of optimism bias associated with the falling in love process. So almost everyone tends to underestimate the carrying costs of a home, or they look at it from the perspective of, we can definitely make this work. But the challenge is that they're only looking at the positives within the equation, not the other realities that come with it. And at risk of sounding too casual, it's not because we're idiots, it's because we're emotionally compromised in the process. And I'm guilty of it as well myself when it came to my own process.
Wow, we're emotionally compromised. That's big language. What do you mean, Casey?
I mean, it's one of those things where it's easier for me to provide guidance on someone else's affairs because I'm not emotionally involved. I'm that sort of pragmatic voice from afar that can try to help somebody look at something through a more pragmatic lens. But when we're talking about my own family, my own situation, it's only human and natural for me to suddenly say, I think we can, if things fall this way, then I can make that work. And I'm only looking at the rosy side of the equation. So we all succumb to it to different extents, but it's a natural human behavior.
You mentioned carrying costs, Casey, and, we're talking less about the financing of home buying and more about the emotional side, but I think that's an important point that you just made. So talk a little bit more about, people have optimism bias, they fall in love with the home and they don't think about the carrying costs.
Yeah, carrying costs, I don't know how to, a home to me is a home base for one's livelihood, successes, failures, challenges, everything. The home itself usually doesn't equate to success or happiness or fulfillment. So when we think about buying a home or renting a home for that matter, It's a matter of how does it fit within the bigger picture of one's values and goals, and what makes them happy, what's most important to them. Carrying costs are all the other expenses associated with the home itself that can sometimes take money away from something that's really important to somebody. And then it's a matter of a plumbing bill or a fixture or a renovation or whatever it may be. So carrying costs from where we sit as it relates to this process is something that we help clients look at to identify what's really affordable within the context of what's really important to them.
So set aside money for when the boiler breaks.
And go.
Right. Well, and all of you, why is it so important to be aware of those emotions? I mean, back to you, Casey, but Renee and John, I want to hear from you too. Why is it so important to at least be aware that these emotions are there? Go ahead, Casey. You said you often sort of are the impartial observer who sometimes brings people down to earth.
Yeah, I think if we're not aware of the emotions, I think we're more likely to succumb to our sort of the optimism bias that I just alluded to, or our own blind spots. And sometimes that can create a consequence that kind of lives beneath the surface for many years until it rears its ugly head. You can't afford the family vacation that's really important to you, or it limits your ability to find fulfillment elsewhere in those other values of your own. So just recognizing the emotions helps mitigate them. And then you have a team like John's or like Renee's that are very matter of fact and help everyone understand the realities of it. And it just leads to a more informed decision-making process.
Oh, that's interesting. So look at the house, yes, but also look at your whole life, Casey. Are you going to want to go back to school or quit your job or send your kids to school or go on a big vacation? So kind of putting in the whole financial picture there, not just focused on the home.
Yeah.
What about you, John? What have you observed, at least the importance of being aware that your emotions may be at play, running away with you and so forth? What have you seen over your 50 years in this field?
Well, you see a lot of stuff. And I talked about the Jekyll and Hyde changes in personality and whatever. And I think it's important that when you start off with a buyer to build those bonds and of trust, and to use the phrase, it's business. It's only business. Remember, this is only business. Don't take this personally. I'm going to try to give you the best advice that I can give you. I'm in your corner. I think practicing your listening skills, watching body language, picking up on those cues, and being, sensitive to the fact that this is an emotional business and stuff is going to happen. So don't overreact to what is normal. It's just, my wife always asks me, why do you want to do this? And I actually enjoy it because it is, you do see people you do see people in all different situations and so forth. And I enjoy that. It's not a cookie cutter type of business at all.
Right. Always different. And, just what Casey said makes so much sense about your home is, yes, it's a place you live, but, you raise your family, there's memories, there's events, Christmases, parties, whatever. So there's a lot of emotional investment in that physical place. So Renee, to you too, what sort of typical emotional patterns have you seen your clients over the years falling into time and time again? And how do you try and yank them out?
I don't know. These are so varied. I've seen every emotion under the sun. It just depends on who you're working with. First-time home buyer, death, estates, divorce. I mean, it's all there. I think, tapping into emotional intelligence and learning about that helps you understand your clients. And once you really understand what motivates them, then you can keep drawing them back to their motivation, and that keeps their emotions under control. So, if you really understand what their needs are, and like Casey said, what they want to do with their life outside of a house, then every time their emotions start to run wild, you can sort of say, on a scale of 1 to 10, where does this fit in on the house side of things and your life side of things? And once they actually hear that question and have to answer it out loud, then their emotions sort of regulate on their own. And sometimes people just need space. Sometimes they need space to think.
Well, and talk a little bit more, please, Renee, about the who. You just touched on that a little bit. For some types of people, home buying, home selling is especially difficult because it's about a lot more than the home. It's about sort of the life stage that they're at.
Yeah, I've particularly in the area that I'm in, we have an older population here. So I've dealt with a lot of transitions going the opposite direction, less first-time home buyers, more second home buyers. And then we have the end of the fourth quarter stage, right, where we are either dealing with the estate sale. And oftentimes those are multiple heirs, 3 to 10 at any given point that you're dealing with on the sell side. And it's challenging. You have to sort of just be matter of fact with your information and yet empathetic as well, especially for when we're transitioning, down from an elder being alive and into an assisted living situation. So, and when you're handling the buyers on those as well, you have to be just as empathetic in the other direction because the buyers get so excited and they want to say so many things, and then it can turn off the seller, and that can just create horrible relationships between people as well. So I think all the emotions as a realtor, I don't know about you, John, but I feel like we're managing realtor emotions when we're dealing with other realtors.
Yeah, that's very discouraging when you're working with another realtor who is emotional and not seeing it as business. Yeah.
And their seller's emotional.
Right. Yeah, right.
Wow.
Right.
So Renee, I'm seeing that situation where an older person is maybe moving into assisted living, is selling that beloved home. A younger couple comes in, they're all gung-ho, but you're right. They need to sort of
the house.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
I'm getting rid of that terrible kitchen. And the older person says, wait, I love that kitchen. I made Christmas cookies there, Yeah. Wow. John, you too, talk about sort of the ages and stages around home buying and selling and how that affects the emotional component of this.
Well, I think that, as Renee was talking about, the younger people full of emotion and excitement about buying a new home and maybe not seeing some of the things that's as a buyer broker. In building the bridges with my buyers, I try to explain things that they may not see first off, so that everything is clear to them. Like if you're down in the basement and you see asbestos on pipes, or you see an open sump pump and you say, oh, this is going to be the mother of all home inspections here because radon is going to be flowing out of the sump, and you need to be able to tell people that. Or you say, oops, there's knob and tube wiring. So it's basically making people aware of the reality of the house that they're looking at, and understanding that remedying these things is going to have a financial component to it. So maybe that's one way of handling emotion right away, is to say, I know you love the house, but you should be thinking about how we remedy these things and so forth.
Casey, you're a financial planner. So what sorts of conversations do you have when it comes to this topic of managing your emotions during home buying, home selling that are associated with, tough life stages?
So I would say that there's two things that we focus on a lot of, especially recently. So the first is we're trying to help all of our clients better understand their needs, wants, and wishes. I think Renee alluded to some of that before. Is, what are those needs? What are those wants? And then what are some of the wishes? I think it's very easy in this process, myself included, to be drawn to some of the wants and wishes at the expense of the needs. You can fall in love with something, it all looks great, you can envision all the fun to be had, but if you don't check off those needs boxes, you eventually have a problem. You're just not aware of it yet, and sometimes that can prove to be very costly. So we really want to help clients look at this within the context of the plan that we have for them. I think the other, call it angle to this conversation, especially right now, is a lot of clients are very worried about overpaying because of the housing market being what it is. And in my experience, if someone finds the right home and it checks off those needs, it checks off a number of the wants and even some of the wishes, it's rare that I've ever come across a situation where somebody ends up being or having any sort of regret for overpaying for the right home. I've seen plenty of situations where somebody buys the wrong home even at a discount, and lives with a lot of regret for a long time. So this conversation of, is it okay to overpay, comes back to, well, is it checking off all of your needs, some of your wants, and then some of your wishes? And obviously, is it still affordable? So it can't be a matter of, is it affordable versus not? If it's affordable, overpaying may not be a big deal.
That's interesting, because earlier, Casey, you sort of said, keep an eye on your whole balance sheet, looking at what you might want to do with your job and what you might want to do in terms of vacation and college and so forth. So don't go too crazy on the financial end. But on the other hand, if it's the right place, it's the right place, and don't get caught up in this, I don't want to overpay.
I would hate to, I'll just add one other thing. So the timeline also plays a really important role in this equation. So if there's a long enough timeline, it checks off all the boxes, it's the right home. Overpaying to a certain degree, as long as it's affordable, from our perspective, usually isn't that big of a deal. What I'd hate to see is a situation where somebody doesn't move forward with the right home that is affordable because of a $10,000 or $15,000 differential, and you go, oh my goodness, this was it. You squabbled over 10 or 15,000 bucks. You're never going to worry about that, and then they pass on it. So affordability, timeline, needs, wants, and wishes, and it being the right home, it's okay.
Well, I want to ask you real quickly about renting, because there is such a priority in American culture for a long time towards home ownership. How much emotional bias is there against renting? Renee, I'm going to turn to you first. Go ahead.
Oh, wow. I don't know how much emotional bias there is against renting. I think renting has a place in everyone's life. I mean, most of us started out renting until we moved up to our first home. And I think some people are exiting homes, and renting makes sense for their financial plan going forward. So I've often, when the market was terrible back in 2008 and things were increasing, and people would ask me to sell their houses, and they would say, I need to get X price because that's what I paid for it. Right. And I would sit down with them and I would say, well, if you rented this particular house somewhere else, you would have paid $4,000 a month. And we run the numbers over the 10 years and they still made money. So, and they had to pay for all the improvements, upkeep and repairs and maintenance and everything else. So I think renting is, if it suits your needs in the moment, if you don't have a long-term plan to be in a certain city, then it doesn't make sense to buy, unless you're looking for an investment property. If you are exiting a property and you can't find one that checks off all your needs, wants, and wishes, then you should go find somewhere to rent. So I think, the problem we're having now is there's just not a lot of rentals. Right. I think everyone and every realtor in the world wish there were more rentals. So I don't know if there's a bias as much anymore. And I'm not sure if I buy into homeownership being the American dream as much as it once was, but that's my 2 cents.
Oh, that's interesting, Renee. Why do you say that? Homeownership maybe isn't the ultimate American dream anymore.
Well, I think that we're seeing people wait longer to get into homeownership. The younger crowd that I see, 20 to 30 to 35, they seem to be more focused on travel and having the experiences today and having other things than homeownership. So I don't think they have a rental bias. I think they're happy living in mom and dad's basement or in a rental situation until they get on their feet. I think homeownership is in the future and it's something they want, but I don't think it's something they need.
Oh, that's interesting. John, you got to jump in there. Very interesting.
Right, yeah. In our community, there's been a lot of new construction of rental units. So there are a lot more choices for people who are looking to rent, whether they want to be downtown or whether they want to be on the outskirts of town. And, Renee hit on all the logical reasons why one would want to rent or not rent. I think if there's any bias towards renting, it's from the real estate community that doesn't want to deal with rentals. And particularly here in where I work on the Seacoast, you have vacation rentals. And can you find me a place for a month? Right. I mean, you want me to pause everything that I'm doing and find you a place for a month. So, I mean, those little things pop up, but, it's a very personal thing. It makes sense for some people, particularly if they're not into property maintenance. If they don't pay attention to the fact that when they buy a property, it becomes immediately a depreciating asset. And if you don't keep it up, you're not going to realize all the good appreciation that you should be realizing out of it. And then you do have the tax burden, particularly here in New Hampshire, that you have to deal with. So, it makes, but, again, we talked earlier about the fact, I guess I'm old school, been around for 50 years, as I said, in the business. And I think, that when you're renting, at the end of the day, you're throwing money down a black hole. And if you've been renting all your life and it's time to move to a different stage, what kind of equity do you have? What kind of the largest asset that you should own that you can convert to cash so that you might go into assisted living or something like that? Where is that asset? If you've been renting, you don't have it. If you've been owning, you might have $1 million or more that you can rely on right then and there. So
something to think about.
Yeah, something to think about. Yeah.
Well, and
very unemotional, but
yeah, very emotional. And given all the emotions, at work here that all of you have described so beautifully. I mean, Casey, you talked earlier about, looking at needs, wants, and wishes, that sort of checklist. So what might be on a checklist for your clients, Casey, with that broader financial picture that would help guide them through this process?
I mentioned the needs, wants, and wishes. I don't know if we necessarily have a checklist in this situation, given that this isn't our expertise. It's Renee's and John's. I will say that the things that we emphasize with clients when they embark on this process, whether it be to sell, whether it be to buy or transition, second home, whatever it may be, is to find the members of their life or their team that they can rely on to give them real, candid feedback, tell them what they don't want to hear when they need to hear it.
Oh, it's interesting.
Sort of their own fiduciaries, per se, that have their best interests in mind and are willing to speak up at a time when they certainly don't want to hear it, but they need to. And I think those members in everyone's lives are really important, and they really shine at during moments or stressful situations that we'd rather not experience, but they happen. So find your fiduciaries and lean into them, so to speak.
So what personal experience do you have with this, Casey, yourself?
I've relied on my fiduciaries a number of times. My first home purchase, I approached my parents, I approached my partner, Tom Sedoric, and others with my spreadsheets and said, rip them apart. Tell me everything that I'm missing. Be that person in my life that I am for others, because coming full circle, my optimism bias kicked in and I was emotionally compromised. Went back through it again the second time around after we sold our home and bought a second. Same thing happened. Definitely relied on my fiduciaries again to point me in the right direction or point out some of my biases when I was looking at certain homes. And in full transparency, we're in the process of putting together my team or our team of fiduciaries again, because our house burned down on April 19th. So I'm relying on others right now to be candid, be clear, tell me what I don't want to hear, but help me set realistic expectations in what's otherwise a very competitive market, as the two of you have just outlined and that I'm aware of. So I rely on others for help, especially when I'm emotionally compromised.
Yeah, and a timely conversation for you, Casey. And we planned this conversation a month ago, and then, we're all so sorry about your house. And
really
glad you're safe.
Awful.
And here you are back out in the real estate market, not even realizing 2 weeks ago that you would be there. So I'm very cognizant of what you're going through right now. I'm really appreciating you being able to even talk about this with us right now. Last question for all of you. We've been talking about the emotions around home buying and home selling. John, to you first. What about the emotions of realtors? What do you and Renee experience? Go ahead, John. Tales from the emotional trenches of being a realtor.
I think one advantage I have is that having been in the business 50 years, you've seen a lot of rejection, And in real estate, you deal a lot with that. And with this market, you're going to leave $4 or $5 million or more on the table every year in sales, because your buyers are finishing fourth or fifth or whatever. So I think that you just need to learn to let it go. The positive thing is, stuff is going to happen. And the way to look at it is to say, thank you very much. I'm moving on, because it takes so many no's to get to a yes, or so many busted deals to get to a deal that goes together. And if you think that way, that's one way I think that's the most important way of dealing with the stress of real estate right now, is just to learn to let things go and move on.
Wow, that's great advice for anybody in any career, really. Wow. Renee, how about you? What sort of emotional roller coaster do you find yourself in sometimes?
I try to think that I'm pretty self-regulated. I have a great team that I work with. So we, in our four walls, we're allowed to say whatever we want. It doesn't leave there. And we try to have a lot of humor. We try to, if it's even ugly, we make something funny out of it, because at the end of the day, the next deal's right around the corner. And I've always believed that if a client doesn't get a deal, then it wasn't their house. And it's 9 times out of 10, the next house they put under contract was exactly the house they should have been in. So, if you have a good relationship with your client, you will end up with a sale. And that process isn't about making the commission check. It's about helping them achieve their goals and their dreams. So if the focus remains there, then you can keep your emotions here and work out a lot.
Wow. Oh, it's awesome. Well, and Casey, as we wrap up, what do you think is most important to keep in mind about this topic, to keep in mind about the emotional side of buying or selling a home, especially as you enter this yourself?
Yeah, I think what either you touched on, or John or Renee, is that buying or selling a home, the transition itself is one of life's greatest stressors. So I think being aware of our emotions, given that emotions tend to drive our behaviors, is step number one. And the more aware we are of our emotions, I think the better prepared we are to make a more informed decision. And when making that decision, making sure that you're looking at making that decision within the context of everything that's important to you, not just the home. And I go back to something I think I mentioned earlier, which is the home is that foundation. It's the home base for one's fulfillments and joys and successes and challenges and everything that life throws at us. The home itself is rarely does it equate to happiness itself. So surround yourself with good people, mitigate those emotions, and good things tend to follow.
Well, that is all the time we have for this conversation, but we could have talked a lot more. I want to thank our guests, Renee Welchman, John Rice, Casey Snyder. It's been great to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thanks also to our engineer, RJ Perkins, and to the Sedoric Group of Steward Partners for sponsoring this series. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and I hope you'll join us for the next episode of Beyond Your Balance Sheet. Keep your eyes on this website for more information. I'm Laura Kanoy. Thanks, everyone, for being with us.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.